Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to today's episode of the Product Angle Show. And on today's episode, we have Nikhil. Good afternoon, Nikhil. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us today, this Friday afternoon.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Remind us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Nikhil Vimal, as Pradeep mentioned, and I'm a consulting partner at a company called Chat Mode. We're a Microsoft partner doing a lot of different things in that space at the moment. I've been in product for several years now, and I've run product at company in my startup, done quite a few different things in the startup space and in the I would say the sort of middle-sized tech company space in the past. And yeah, I live and breathe product, really. I love talking about it. I love coming up with new ideas on how to expand horizons as a product manager for a company and really build something in that really optimizes efficiency and make sure that everyone can be happy with the structure of working on product together. So
perfect. So I know you mentioned something last time you were on the show, but tell us something different that we cannot Google about you.
Right. Yeah. This one will probably come up a little bit more now because I don't know. I found like really awesome communities that foster my passion for sneakers. Actually, that's something. If you go on Google, you won't discover that I'm actually a massive sneakerhead, and my collection has been building a little bit more rapidly in the last few years than it has just historically. And yeah, I want to do some side projects around that. I even talked to startups that are in the space that are helping people like get sneakers and promote that sort of streetwear culture. So it's an interesting hobby, but I'm trying to find a way to like merge my love for tech and my love for like the sneakerhead world together. And there might be something in the future, so keep an eye out on that. It's gonna be pretty cool.
Perfect. So on today's episode, we will be talking about breaking down roadmaps in Trello. So before we get into the Trello portion, let's go pull back a little bit and what is a roadmap to you? In your experience, in your career, you've like you said, you've been head of product, you've led product teams. How do you define the purpose and the goal of a roadmap?
Sure. So for me, because I've worked with a plethora of different companies in the past of different sizes and different scale, a lot of it to me. So a roadmap is very contextual to start off with. Just to give sort of some context here is that it is something that will depend a lot, especially if you're coming in and rebuilding roadmaps or redesigning roadmaps for a team that already has rough roadmaps, or if you're getting started with, the way that you want to break it down could be very different depending on the size of your company. So, for a startup, you might literally just be trying to build out different sorts of roadmaps for both investors and internal use, right? That just might be like starting from scratch. If you're, a middle-sized startup tech company type thing, or even just a smaller organization, but you've been around for a while, you might just be trying to find new ways to optimize, ways to take features and, get to the end. And it might be, you might already have many roadmaps, but you might just be looking to make it more specific to different features and different, versions of the app or different elements of what you're building. So to me, specifically, a roadmap is a guiding tool. And essentially, I think it has to be very visual. Usually, a little bit there has to be a mental model behind it, and a lot of sort of like gut feelings, I think, with some of it too. But it has to be a way to keep you as a product person and your team, and really, it could be the whole company. Like I think the product people should definitely be helping the whole company build roadmaps at times. It's an accountability tool, actually. Really, when it comes down to it, it's helping everybody understand this is what our plan looks like. This is how far we want to think about things. This is the way we want to break down major epics, right? If we're thinking in the Scrum sense, like I think a roadmap usually doesn't contain stories unless you're a startup and you're trying to put everything in one board, which isn't really even, I don't fully suggest that. Yeah. But it really should be, it can be themes and epics, really. You could have both of those things sort of wrapped in. I know we're going to be talking about Trello, so I'll talk about the Scrum methodology behind, what you can do there later. But, the concept to me really feels like a visual guide that helps a company or a team figure out what their next, 6, 12, 18-month plan could look like. And it really has to be something that's focused, and it really has to be something that's, I think, usually high level. And like I said, you can make it more specific, but I do have suggestions against that, and we'll get into that when we're probably talking more about the medium of building a roadmap. So,
perfect. Now, what are some of the important things that you should consider? Some of the inputs that go into a roadmap?
Goals and milestones are the two big ones that come to mind. Like I said, I think epics and themes of, if you're thinking on the Scrum side, 100% important. I think having a very good way to categorize those different themes and epics too, or maybe even put them across different teams, right? I think roadmaps are also, I think that roadmaps can be or should be built out as multidisciplinary tools as well. So, having you could have one roadmap, but it contains everything from the design team, the engineering team, everybody who sort of needs to see it. But I think it helps bridge together a lot of gaps so that teams know what they're working on, right? They know what their expectations are. They know what month or even what week. You could have roadmaps be pretty specific. But I think that the important input is understanding how you want to label things, how you want to categorize things, and making sure that, those line up with goals and milestones for different teams and goals and milestones for a company as a whole. So it definitely comes, like I said, it's definitely contextual to what company you're working for. Obviously, if you're at a super massive company, your roadmaps might be a little bit more fragmented. But I think there's a lot of, even if you're if you're watching this and you're planning to redesign a roadmap that you've had for a while, consider ways to optimize the way that you're categorizing the data and the way that you're aligning a lot of different literal just due dates or launch dates, and making sure that each team knows what their role is in the context of months, weeks, whichever way you're splitting up the timeline for the roadmap. So yeah,
definitely. You said some good points there, because context really matters, and a product manager that works for a Fortune 500 company versus someone who works in a Series A, Series B funded company is going to be a completely different kind of mentality and role. Oh, yeah. So that's very important to point out there. But in your opinion, you talked about some dates. What's your feeling on roadmaps that have dates? Is that considered a roadmap? Is that considered a delivery schedule? Talk us through, how you think about having dates on roadmaps.
So that's a great point, actually, because I do think of I think of delivery schedules and roadmaps they could be in one. Again, this is contextual though. I definitely don't want to over promote that you should try to condense too many things together, especially if you're in a Fortune 500 company. Yes. I know that's a different story, and I can even speak to that too. But to go to your sort of the root of your question, at the very least, it needs to be a range of dates on a roadmap for sure. That's something that I live and breathe by. In terms of having dates, it really depends on sort of the way that your team thinks too. So I think having a delivery, I think for me, I'm historically built a lot of delivery schedules that are solely for engineering. Yeah. So those look a little bit different. Those are more across versions of an app or versions of a web app. And they're roadmaps in their own ways, I suppose, but they're not necessarily those are more specific to different teams and how those teams react to, getting due dates and getting a delivery timeline, right? A roadmap can still have dates, but it just needs to be understood that this is not going to be the place where you're going to necessarily see some of the nitty gritty. It's more of the high level. And so, like I said, you could have range of dates. You could just literally have it be a month, I suppose. But for me, I put dates in roadmaps usually around launches, actually. So that is pretty key, I think. And then, around certain, definitely it's not a place where you try to task too much out, in my opinion. I think roadmaps should definitely be, they should be a little bit of a step back. And so, to your point, I think in bigger companies, that's where you start splitting up, different timelines and different methodologies, even for how you're setting up, the way that due dates and different milestones and goals. But at the very least, a roadmap should be something that guides towards, it should suggest what it looks like to have a good time, where these things should be in the context of a timeline. I think it definitely shouldn't be too sort of mysterious to the user or to the people, to employees in the company. It should be something that if it's not a specific date, it should suggest that, there is a place where you can see the specific dates, but it's at least going to be this month or it's going to be this quarter, something like that.
Fair enough. Now, in your opinion, who owns the roadmap?
Yeah, so that's a great question. For me, the roadmap owners should be, I think usually the C-suite should at least have access and ability to edit the roadmap a little bit. I think that's pretty key in I guess a early stage startup, Series A, Series B. I know we're talking about product roadmaps specifically, but in that case, I still think there should be, since product brings a lot of things together anyways, I think it is pretty important to consider, bringing in every executive if needed, right? If this is more of a general context roadmap. If there are some smaller roadmaps, like you don't necessarily need to have a bunch of people who are like doing finance and stuff in it, like, but you could at least have a few people like a CTO where it might matter. But usually I think it should be everybody who should at least have some like feeling of ownership. And then obviously the head of product or product managers should be able to, they should be the ones who are maybe doing the most to hold the company. Like they should be holding that accountable. Like it shouldn't be expected that the C-suite's going to come in one night and save everyone if there wasn't a roadmap, pieces updated. Like it should be the product managers, which are the ones where when it comes down to it, they're the ones who should be responsible for these product roadmaps, and they should be the ones who should be able to expand a lot on it. And like I said, I think product managers might tap into managing more development heavy roadmaps as well. If you're a technical product manager, if you are a product manager and designer, you might have some hand in making design roadmaps as well if we're breaking it up into different teams.
Yeah.
Even if they're not specific to product as a whole piece, it might be useful to at the very least have some guidance, because a product person should be in general just very familiar and very versed. I'm sure heads of design and heads of engineering can make them as well, but a product manager can be there to help. So maybe not ownership per se, but even in a startup situation, like co-ownership of different different timelines and roadmaps could be pretty useful. So yeah, just abstracting on that a little bit. At the end of the day, I think the product manager, heads of product, and the executives team should definitely have the major pieces of ownership for making the roadmaps.
Fair enough. What trends have you seen recently in how people are creating roadmaps, maintaining roadmaps?
Oh, that's a great question. Obviously, the tools are, I know we're talking about Trello, but I do have to be completely honest. The tools are getting pretty dynamic out there for doing this. Like, I think I've seen a lot of new things come up. There's tools that, they do, like, there's a lot of integrations and different ways that you can build roadmaps, like from Slack and Microsoft Teams and stuff like that. Like I've seen some solutions or just like at least experimental solutions, micro SaaS, whatever, of different ways to like maybe generate roadmaps very quickly. In terms of maintaining them, the trends, again, like I do have to be honest, if we're thinking about product roadmaps really here, it is going to be one of those things that are a little bit contextual again.
Yeah.
Honestly, the trends that I see is that once people are very versed in the medium that they've created their roadmap in, there definitely there's a skill that comes with that. There's a way to, very quickly be able to have discussions around the roadmap if needed. And, like once there's familiarity, once there's comfort, especially if it's like a newer company or a company moving to a new tool or something along that line. Once that familiarity comes through, like it's really cool to see heads of product or product managers who might have not been familiar with a certain tool or with a familiar methodology for creating roadmaps, get very comfortable and suddenly they can, at a moment's notice, they know what's needed in the roadmap. If they're in a meeting that's not even about the roadmap or anything, they know like, oh my God, this is probably going to change the roadmap within a week or two, right? Or this might adjust what we're doing. So, I'm going to take a step back and like jump into, or I'm going to be ahead of the game. I'm going to take a step up really and make sure that everything is updated at the exact moment. So, I mean, in general, I believe that product managers and heads of product and just product people should be very much in tune with what's going on in their company. But when you're able to really reflect that into, a visual way and into timelines and different like roadmap elements, that's a superpower, and that's a maintenance superpower for sure. So that's sort of my belief around that. Fair
enough. Now, when roadmaps are created and software has their own prioritization techniques built in, without going into detail of the product that you're building or you've built in the past or whatever it may be, can you talk a little bit about what types of prioritization techniques you use in terms of deciding what should be built next?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Prioritization. So I talked about it earlier, like categorization and being able to label or being able to set up context around epics and themes within the Scrum methodology are very key here. Prioritization, a lot of it, at least the way that I have run product before, it's been very conversational. This means a lot of calls with different teams and understanding, if I'm a product person managing, marketing design and or rather bringing together marketing, design, and engineering, right? Like those are probably the most common things you're going to be, pulling together as in a startup space. Having really good conversations in the context of like literally just having roadmap calls are super key ways to have that prioritization set out. So the other teams might not necessarily be held accountable to keeping their eye on the roadmap every single day, right? It might be like it's certainly useful and can be very helpful, but it certainly is it's something that they might be a few weeks or they're in a sprint or they're really rushing to get things done. So they might not check the roadmap, but the product person should be the one that brings them back down and says, hey, we got feedback. We got some data. We've taken the analytics. We've taken, we had something blow up last week, right? And this is how we've resolved it. Now we can move forward. And, here's how we can do that in the context of the roadmap that, I, as a product person myself, have set out to keep it going, right? Even if there's delays, even if there's other things that have come up that are, maybe a little bit disruptive in the process, being able to have those right conversations, asking the right questions and making sure that everyone's on the same page. That's a prioritization like superpower. But also making sure that you can be very in depth with how you're describing different elements and different feature ideas and then bring that into the room as a conversation. That's very important as well. So I think it's very communication based, right? I think it's at the very least sending a Slack message saying like, hey, engineering team, I want to start designing, or this feature might be it'll go through the design process next week. And then you guys will get requirements very soon. What do you think of like this in the context of the roadmap? Is this good for Q1 or should we push this? Like we're almost done with Q1 though. So should we push this to Q2? And, but if they go to the roadmap and it's just like, there's really no guidance and they don't even know what that feature is, I'm just like, it's not going to, or they don't know the context of that feature or why it's even been decided. Like that's not going to be helpful to anybody. So a couple things there, but definitely like to me, communication, as in general, that's always key in an organization. Like that's a no brainer, but in the context of roadmaps, like making sure you're bringing people to that mindset of like, hey, we're going to work on this together and we're in this together. That will make your prioritization not just better, but easier. Like it will get easier with time because you'll be able to, consistently ask the right questions and hold, other people will hold you accountable, but that'll make you a better product leader as well. So.
Definitely. And we were, I usually have these half an hour, 20-minute chats with each guest before the show. And we were talking about this beforehand where communication is so important, collaboration and negotiation as a product manager to build on those skills is so vital because that's central to the role of a product manager. Yeah, totally fits into the roadmap conversation here. Totally. Yeah, definitely. So let's move into Trello now. Trello is a very popular software. There's a free tier or a freemium plan, if you will, that gives you so much value. And, if anyone's struggling, to create a roadmap, it's so easy to just set up and use, right? Yeah, so absolutely. Just in your own words, what is Trello to you? So Trello to me, outside of creating roadmaps and outside of creating, pretty in-depth, even delivery schedules and different types of timelines, for me, it's really it is my core product management tool. Like this is something I love, like and even I've done project management before too. And it's just as useful. It's for a lot of things. It's really useful. But for me, at the end of the day, this is the core platform I use to set up my Scrum-based Kanban boards and essentially manage everything that's needed to make sure that a product is on track and a product can, reach 0 to finish, right? In terms of different features, in terms of different launches, versions, et cetera. Like I said, though, it's in a lot of the organizations I work with, the head of engineering is also running their own Trello board, right? We have the dev board / platform boards. It could even be like a front end, back end board, to go back to like the design marketing examples as well. Like they have their own boards and a product, the product team can also have, its own board. Maybe it's a little bit more general. Like I said, like in a startup context, like I've definitely had to jump around boards a little bit to make sure that my board can take what sort of like, maybe not necessarily the specific task, but take sort of the epics or maybe some of the higher level stories and put them into an overall board as well, an overall roadmap, right? But it is something that I use to really, like as a product leader, I use it for, everything that's needed within a company for most of the companies that I've worked with now. And it's definitely, like I said, though, it's definitely, if you're doing project management, still very useful. And, just to abstract on it, like it can run an entire organization from a product management standpoint. And the fact, like, just to even add on a little bit more, the power-ups that they have in it with GitHub and Bitbucket, and I think GitLab too, like you can really run your entire engineering teams on the task-based system in there as well. I know GitHub has GitHub projects, but to me, that looks kind of like,
that kind of looks like Trello. It's the same, well, it's the same sort of concept of Kanban boards, just, built into the platform. But, Trello can integrate even more things into one platform. That's the greatest part. So you can have different workflow automation, have it trigger Zapier, have it trigger Slack. And it's a super powerful tool. And, outside of just creating roadmaps, it's something that I live and breathe by. So I got to give it a proper shout out. And one of my favorite parts is actually it started as a bootstrapped company.
Okay.
And that's I think that's one of my favorite facts, just because, their acquisition from Atlassian was a pretty damn impressive acquisition. And it was definitely a labor of love in the way that they built it very publicly, if I recall too. In fact, I think they were sharing their roadmaps from a very, very early stage. Because I remember a lot of when they were really blowing up in all the different spaces that were using them, people were asking them all the time people bugging them about feature requests. And they actually had this public roadmap that they created, which is really solid, which just put things in a different, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and allowed everyone to actually see up-to-date progress on some of the most requested features, which really made the reputation quite, it boosted the reputation to no end. Because seriously, at that time, I guess this was probably 2013, 2014 when I discovered that there were no other project, Asana was not really doing that. And I think a lot of the other, project management and product management tools at the time, or just organizational tools at the time, were really not building in public, nor were they bootstrapped, right? There was quite a bit of money, I'm sure, already behind them. Or it was, and the way that it worked was pretty fantastic. And yeah, gotta give a huge shout out. And, they're great folks there too. I know a couple people, I think, from who might still be there, but yeah.
Fair enough. Can we look at one of your boards on Trello and
sure. Let's do it. So
do we have this? Yes. So now your board is being shown on the screen.
Excellent. So yeah, so my roadmaps are, outside of having specific dates, I am a fan of having it be month to month. Actually, that's how I run most of my boards. So, or, I guess I have a nice little note date section here as well. But essentially, the way that I set it up here is, or to give a little bit of context, for me, building a product roadmap is bridging together a lot of different things that need to make the product happen, right? So again, this is not where I put every single little story. I might have some milestones or goals mixed into some of these epics or whatnot, but I'm not going to have, fix the avatar on the site or something like that, or post on Sunday for, it's not a content calendar, right? Or whatever, but it might look like something similar, but it's definitely focused very much on bridging together the main high level, again, epics, goals, milestones, and then possibly themes as well into one place. So obviously I have, this is probably, I realize it's probably copied from these might not be totally relevant, although these could be relevant too, but I have a team resources list to start off with. So basically, in this Kanban style, you can create, an infinite amount of lists and just keep going up and down. But first things first, I want people to understand, how to use the roadmap here. So, this is just some generic stuff that I have here, but in a real board, this would maybe describe different labels, different, methods of conversation. Hey, if you guys know something's wrong, reach out to me here, something like that. So there's definitely, the first thing that the users should try to, or potential employees who are using this should try to see is a way to understand what they're looking at, right? So I have this guide over here in terms of, how to read it. And then of course I'm using, this is something really cool that came out actually, but very recently, but there's this nice way to make Trello cards actually have this very defined cover now. And in a context of a product roadmap, this is how I do epics now. Before I used to just have a label that had epics, right? Or it had maybe an epic had an image and then certain milestones and stories, an actual task didn't. But in the context of this, my whole roadmap, usually just looks like these different things, which are categorized into different disciplines. So in this case, there's maybe an engineering epic, and then it just color coded across multiple different months. So this is a big engineering goal that had, product focus. This is a big product design goal. This is a big, product marketing goal that had, or product marketing epic that had, a lot of focus. And so, yeah, the way that I do it, obviously in a startup, you might have it be, it might be a 6 to 8 month roadmap, right? You're running after a budget, right? Just whatever you have, whatever, burn rate, right? And then in a bigger company, this might be more about having it in, like if it was more for a product within an organization type thing, this might be very specific to the budgets that are given to that team, right? Or what's allocated. So that's the context that I was talking about too, right? Is that the way that you manage building out features, timeline, scopes, budget, those will determine, how you're sort of creating the timetable for your roadmap here. But yeah, my philosophy is, and then like, just to show quickly, like these are my example, like product boards, right? This becomes more of like, I might have an Epic in here too, but then I have like the specifics of, I wanted to show this OAuth integration, Slack integration. And then obviously this is the classic, like engineering / like very day-to-day, or not just like really multidiscipline, like Scrum board, right? To do in progress block done. And then I don't consider these roadmaps per se. I consider these just boards, just like classic Kanban boards that are supposed to do their role. And maybe these do have more specific dates and more specific time ranges and due dates and things. These might be like, okay, within this month, like this epic might have a date, but a lot of these other epics might just be scheduled for the future, but we're not going to hold them on to a date until we have, we're not going to hold them down to a certain or if it all launches within one singular launch theme. We're gonna only the theme will have like a very specific date, but everything will at least be in a certain timeline that we can follow. And then here's where I would really do the nitty gritty of like, okay, I'm gonna assign this to, I'm gonna assign this to a coworker, and then you can, do crazy things. I meant to show off the cards as well, but you have labels in here. You have ways to add different members. You can do checklists. You can do due dates, attachments, covers. Here's the power-ups feature, which I don't know what it's gonna show up right now, but yeah, you have all these different ways of setting up nice, so you can also set up, there's like literal power-ups that can change the whole design of your roadmaps as well to make them maybe more familiar to you, and make them more analytical or whatnot. So like more calendar, or if you're trying to work more calendar based, there's ways to do that as well. But I think there's like Trello just has really a very important, depth of understanding of their customer, which has allowed, for a very awesome development, or like I should call it an add-on community to thrive as well. Like there's so many people want to build Trello integrations because they know people will use them. I mean, you can see there's like I think this is counting the number of boards that it's in. And even the ones that are made by Trello are just simply like, these are the basics for any successful tech company these days, right? Like these are all very familiar, concepts and platforms, and even just like whatever, you can have custom field, like all these things are super useful. So so that's more about like specific board processes. But, for me, a roadmap is, just like in a general sense, this is sort of what it's all about, right? Is that it's like, like I said, I might not even really have this in here. I might turn it into an epic quickly. So, so I'll make it like an example milestone, feature milestone or whatnot. And then let me show you guys how it's done. So I'll make this an engineering one as well, per se. Like I'll make it dark blue. And then, I have these things that like, okay, so I know for this one, it might have a specific date. Like I can just put that as like a launch date of, next week at the same time. And then, this one doesn't have anything yet, but at the very least, we know the relative range in the month that it'll be worked on. So, that's sort of I don't know what you'd want me to dig in more around some of the elements of Trello, but at the very least, that's sort of what I think about, when I'm doing roadmaps within a lot of the organizations that I work in.
No, this is good. Thank you. It sounds like you love Trello, as a lot of people do. So, instead of me asking you features and, what you like, what you,
Sure.
stuff like that, tell me one thing or, a couple of things or whatever's on top of your mind right now that you wish Trello had, or it doesn't make your life easy in a particular way or whatever. So bottom line, how can you improve Trello?
Interesting. So, I mean, I think that there is, how should I say it? So for engineering, there's certainly some resources, like just because I've been like a product and engineering team lead before, actually. So like I've been able to live in like basically co-own the engineering team. And there are certain features here that like, I think there are actually power-ups that can still turn your things into more technical focus boards, but there are certain learning curves, certainly, that I think some teams that are very technically minded who use something like Jira, right? Or use some of the other like dev tools out there might not enjoy as much here. Like they might need more deeper integration into their pull requests and issues and different things that they're doing. And I think, like I said, I'm really glad that Trello was bought by Atlassian, right? Because I think they are like actively tackling ways to make dev boards very possible as well. But I was just gonna say that I think like for roadmaps, I don't have anything specifically that I
Sure.
wish it had. It's more for the multidisciplinary stuff that me as a product manager going around managing these like different elements and bringing them together, seeing other teams struggle with using Trello at times, particularly on the dev side, or not struggle, but just wish for more features. Like that impacts me as well though too, right? Because that might mean that they're not as motivated to use the tool in the most like in-depth way, or they might not focus on it as much, when they kind of should be. Like there's a lot of different downsides to just having it, but it can't do possibly everything, right? It's like there's no such thing as a perfect tool. Definitely. But I think at the very least, Trello they're working very closely with, I think, their communities and whatever, plus their power-ups to make sure that these things become, very much possible. So I think mostly, at the very least, I think there's like movement and progress on it. So I'm not too worried. But yeah, I just wish that in some ways there were some tools that could make Trello a little bit more dev inclined at times with some of the more like dev heavy tools. But I think they're going to get there very soon. And then, at least for where I'm coming from, like Trello's going to have everything I need really to continuously help run teams and continuously be a solid product person. So yeah,
definitely. So I've taken the Trello board off the screen, so we're back just you.
Okay. Sweet.
What's your philosophy in terms of getting ideas and customer feedback and incorporating that into, roadmaps? How do you, talk us through your thought process and how you look at these items?
So definitely, it all filters into the epics and milestones, right? I guess I just didn't, just sort of in the interest of time, I wasn't able to sort of go in like too depth, but I want to at least show the like layout. But if I was to really I want to talk a little bit more about my methodology than even like the platform that I'm using, because I think this could be useful across multiple different roadmap resources. But essentially, these things it goes back to what I was talking about, having very in-depth epics, themes, and goals and milestones, right? It's like having a solid roadmap is a lot about understanding how you can take user feedback and how you can take what's going on in your platform. Like if you're there's great tools, right? Like Full Story and Mixpanel, which will literally tell you every single action that a user takes, which can be very, very important and very eye-opening. But to me, what that specifically does is that fuels almost like I write a paragraph around some of the things that I see. Like I write it as a written user journey when I see feedback. Like if I watch a video of a frustrated user using our platform, I'll write that out as something that's like pretty abstracted. It's not just going to be like user was frustrated because button didn't work. It's here's why it could be happening. Here's who should be on top of it, right? Here's which team should be on top of it. Here's how I as a product manager can hold the different teams accountable or different disciplines accountable to make sure if I have a product team of my own, right, which is like a product design team and a product marketing team, like here's what I can tell them to make sure that feedback or even like customer success, I think gets to work a lot with product. I haven't brought them up yet, but obviously they're the ones who are probably getting hit first with that feedback sometimes if the user decides to make the action of going to a chat, right? Going to a live chat. So there's a lot of understanding and making sure that those problems can be taken care of, and B, where those problems can be taken care of in the context of what you can accomplish, which is, again, it's very contextual in a roadmap, right? Because if you're a startup, you can't possibly build out every feature. And even if you're a massive Fortune 500 company and you're managing a product, there is an allocated budget. There's allocated, quote, like there's like things that you have to hit, right? There has to be milestones that you have to hit on behalf of the company, not just on behalf of your own team that has autonomy. So with all that in mind, I think it's the understanding. It's like context, right? It's like your roadmap has to be very defined by the amount of information that you put into it to justify new features and to create new ideas and brainstorm. And also you have to understand your limitations as a product leader, like what is working against you so that these things can happen. Even if because users will always say, I would love to use your platform, ... This feature has to be there though. I'm not going to pay $35 a month. I'm not going to pay, $150 a month. It doesn't matter. There'll always be users who are just not going to be satisfied. And for teams, like if I'm a more technical product manager, so it's always very tempting for me to just start writing a story. But what I do is rather than writing stories, rather, it's writing like literal just tasks, just jumping into it for the engineering team or design team to start getting going on. But what I do is I actually sort of like journal it out myself, come up with some justification, and then do a little bit of a sort of analysis, right? Just a product, I'd call like product customer fit, right? Like is this something like, can we fit this into with the customer? Can we fit this into like a group, even like a demographic that's using this in a timely fashion? If not, that's just the reality, right? We only have certain amounts of manpower and resources to get there. And if we can, like, then I'll start, then discussion starts, right? And then, usually that discussion with an engineering team or with teams that are doing some of the more like nitty gritty, that does start with me opening up the roadmap and opening up the epic and being like, all right, everybody, so this is what I've written out. This is who I think should be on it. What do you guys think? Like I think as a product manager, like you definitely have to have leadership. So, sometimes it is sort of like the buck stops with me, like this is who's going to do it. But if they tell me, they have to be honest with me as well. Like, all right, we can get started on this tomorrow. We can start like, oh no, move this to next year, right? This is Q1 of 2021. Like this is not even possible in 2020 because of what the development hours are going to look like. And, I have to just work with them on that though, right? I have to guide them for them to be honest with me. And so in that situation, like I said, it's just understanding, sometimes as a product manager, you can make the decision yourself of things not being able to work. You might already know, but if you're not 100% sure, like, working with the multidisciplinary teams that you have in the company, like that's gonna be very important as well. But having the roadmap as the sort of the slide, the pitch deck, right? Or like the pitch basically of what's possible and what's not, or like what's proposed and what's not, that's going to be like the way that you're going to win, is making sure that you understand how you can utilize it and making sure that you can have other people be aware of it. But then at the end of the day, as a product leader, you're the one who has to know about it the most. You have to be the one who's updating it, right? I think so. Everyone else should be waiting for your guidance on it and waiting for their opportunity to jump in, maybe to voice their opinion. But, they're not the ones necessarily like writing out the massive epics and coming up with all the different, centralizations that need to or centralizing concepts that need to come into building a new feature or brainstorming something new. So, yeah,
definitely. So one last question before we finish this session. And this session is someone who's, a product manager or founder who's starting to build roadmaps for the first time. Mm-hmm. What advice, lessons learned would you like to share for someone, who's just now being tasked with helping out build out that roadmap? Yeah.
So this actually goes back to something you mentioned before, and I should have mentioned it then because I think this is kind of cool. But the way that I actually build out my roadmaps I start without any timeline, actually, usually, or the way that I sort of sketch it out is without any timeline. I'm just like, okay, this is where I'm given a product. I'm working on a new product, right? This is a big thing. This is a big undertaking. It's going to need this many people. But I start off with just a feature list, right? I start off with the epics and the themes. Yeah. And I sort of do a lot of there's a lot of, sort of like, I'll call it like not corporate soul searching, but organizational soul searching, right? I get to know the organization as much as I can. I'm talking more about maybe I used to do product consulting as well. So I'll go to this great example of I work a little bit backwards, right? I create a roadmap, which looks like, where does the product want to be within a year? But the way that I actually set up the epics are without any sort of timeline in that year at first. And then I sort of work with the teams and I understand it more, but I start sort of backwards where, I don't just start putting things in different places and sort of randomizing. It starts with just a massive, massive list. It starts with the understanding of at least a year. I mean, sometimes companies will make you will push you to be like, oh no, we will need this done in 6 months. So don't think that far. But if you have flexibility on a time range, I think about the goals and milestones. So yeah, sorry. I think about goals and milestones first, and goals first, epics, then milestones. Sorry, that's the order that I do it in.
Okay.
And all of that is usually without necessary dates, just understanding that this is what it's probably going to have to take. This is what it's going to look like from a product perspective. This is the way that it's going to need to be product managed. This is what the different resource, this is a general idea of different resources. And then as you get to know, as you get people sort of giving you a thumbs up on proposals or giving you, as the organization seems to align together, then you start putting it, together. So different organizations work differently. Sometimes people will push you to start off with like, no, we literally just need something for September, right? Like, or by September, and it's already August, right? And that's going to just lead you to, that's going to force you to have to come up with different elements on the roadmap and also work with different people on timelines and due dates, like quite intensely. But if you have the time, a lot of it is being able to just, like I said, like I'm just a very in-depth person. I don't think it's just me though. I think it's good to understand context, and it's good to really abstract a concept, at least for yourself as a product manager, and not have it be necessarily barred by timelines or whatever, but just understanding, to bring it full circle, it's just for the sake of prioritization. That is actually the first step. It's like, what does this look like? And then how does that work into dates? How does that work into specific milestones? But the goals work right into that prioritization as well. So sorry, I was like, in my head, I was trying to figure out the best way to explain it too, because it's one of those things I don't talk about a lot. Yeah. But in the end, the exact order is, it's like goals / prioritization, then into coming up with the epics and themes, or, themes, then epics, sort of getting through that process with the Scrum methodology, and then sort of also bringing that all together with the milestones as well. And then sort of putting that together into like a time range, and then putting that into something quite visual as well. So that's my roadmap process. And it's worked wonders. It's worked great. And, I'm happy to I'm more than happy to keep talking about it for hours and hours, because it can go very in depth, right? But that's a testament to what you should be as a product manager. I think when building roadmaps is in depth, like let it all out here. Like, I know that tasks can have different levels of data and different levels of categorization and prioritization, which could be, because it could be really small stuff, right? It's like the escape key doesn't do anything on this page. For some reason it's blocked. I don't know. I've had that issue before in a platform before that I've worked on, but like in that, you don't have to explain that much other than the user feedback. But then there might be people who say, well, we want to bring our entire organization to use this platform, right, that you've built out. To give an example of like some of the startups I worked with before, where they've had like, I've worked for an ed tech company before. There was an entire school that wanted to jump onto the platform, but they needed one feature that was not anywhere on the roadmap. No one had thought of it. Yeah. And in that case, there was actually a way that we were able to find a compromise with them, where we were able to prioritize some other features to compensate for one of the larger features on our roadmap. So we actually ended up showing them a roadmap, which was call it a stakeholder product roadmap. So it wasn't everything, because sometimes product roadmaps have some things that we just don't want to share to the public, but we shared as much as we could, right? Sort of a remixed roadmap. And then that was enough for them to say, oh, wow, like we didn't even think of this feature that you guys are going to launch next month. That can totally work for now compared to this bigger feature that we want. And we sometimes guide them through that too. Yeah. But that can be game changing as well. That can be something to consider. How can you also use roadmaps to find compromises? I think a lot of early product managers that I talk about don't necessarily think, like, I know roadmaps are supposed to be very sort of guiding and very sort of set in stone, but shit happens, and big opportunities comes, like big enterprise level opportunities come along, and being able to adapt and be able to be flexible with that, like that could really help boost who you are as a product leader as well, and help you scale, really just help scale in the future.
Definitely. We have an audience question if you're open.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, absolutely.
Raj says, what do you think is the biggest challenge in creating a meaningful roadmap in a startup?
That's a fantastic question, because I've had that question not necessarily asked, but I've been tasked with, figuring out what that is, even for companies that are literally starting from scratch, right? And are trying to weigh the pros and cons of setting something up for 6 to 8 months. So that is the challenge, right? It's prioritization, with the understanding that your features might be locked by the fact that you might run out of money in a year, right? Like that's fun. That's part of the fun of the startup, but that's also certainly a very anxiety-inducing period of time, is when you have a full roadmap and you realize, like, oh shit, like we better get these things done, because this will lead to our next fundraising round. This will lead us to, this could help us close some clients, but it just needs to be done, right? So the challenge comes down to understanding, like lean teams you can do a lot with a lean team. I've worked with the, sub 20 teams. I work with teams that are massive, but there is a challenge of, call it alignment of prioritization. So that's where everybody in a startup, everyone needs to come together around one roadmap essentially. And usually product is the one who's guiding it. And the executive team has a role in that as well. Like that's what I was sort of referring to. But in a team of like 6 people, this can be a huge challenge, right? Because everybody certainly has, in the early stage of a startup, certainly has different ideas of directions that could go. and being able to align on how to prioritize different features and different just different concepts. Like at the end of the day, there are themes around this, right? There is different, even like the way to build it out into stories, right? And ways to have that all come back into a specific date or time or month to finish this feature and get it out in a launch is, it's certainly a challenge, but it's something that, this will, it comes down to compromise. I spoke about that a little bit, right? It comes down to communication and compromise. And, once you have those things together, like I said, the tool is never really a challenge. I think I've never come across the tool that I'm using to be much of a challenge. So, it is an interesting, it's an interesting dilemma to be in, especially with a smaller startup. But, at startup scale, there's also, issues of having too many opinions coming in and figuring out how to clear the noise as well, and making sure that, different people know what they're accountable for and what their expectations are. And I see there's a follow-up question.
Yes.
A control on the themes. That's correct. That's true. How should you go about pushing to include an insight learn interacting with support CS teams into the roadmap? Ooh, great question. Actually, I did think about that too, because I have had that situation where I don't control the themes, certainly. But include an insight learn. So, I have a pretty clear answer for this, because I've been in this situation before as a PM. So what I've done, or what my strength has always been, is just being very thorough about the insight that I'm including, that I learned interacting, right, with understanding some user feedback that came through, understanding some feature request or whatever came through, right? And if you're thinking about an early stage startup, themes might be a lot more high level, right? Those might be very much sort of like solely controlled by an executive, and then really only epics you have to basically suggest maybe more than actually just sort of have free autonomy on. So it's almost like having like micro proposals though have been very helpful in reassurance and understanding the insight learned, right? It's like, having like obviously graphics and having like images and different ways to prove that this is something that people have been asking for, like super great. Like if you can do a little bit of a number crunching, that's always a helpful thing for people who are trying to determine their bottom line. But also, just like I said, like thinking about justification of the way that you want to prioritize this, of the way you want to build this, of the way you want to tackle this, that requires, to me, a level of openness and candor that I've seen PMs that are kind of blunt, which is fine. Like sometimes that does work, but in my perspective, the best product leaders are the ones who can really, or even just product managers, like even if you don't have a lot of control, the best thing you can do is definitely take it from a perspective of like, I know my role in the company, I know what the expectations are of me, and here's what I can deduce from my knowledge of being a proper PM in an organization and in a startup specifically here. And here's the knowledge and all the things that I've learned based on my interactions in something that's organized and something that an executive could put into the budget sheet and be like, oh wow, like, or they could look at it in the context of a budget, because that does matter, right, for a startup, and be like, okay, this is not going to bankrupt us in a month or two. Like this will make us more money because the PM has come to me saying that this is going to be something that will bring the product a lot of value, right? I haven't said the word value enough in this too, but it's being thorough also is a way to offer value in these kind of contexts. So that's definitely my suggestion. But yeah, like working with a support or customer success team like that, they're not probably the ones who have to do, unless you have a head of customer success who kind of works closely, like they might not be able to help you write up that proposal very much, right? Like they might just have to report it and then they have to go back to doing support, right? If it's a fast moving product. So, the superpower here is understanding, how you can abstract, but still make it very clear that this does matter. This does need to be a part of the roadmap. And, this is in our best interest. So
definitely.
Yeah, I just ran a marathon in my throat.
No, it's very valuable. So thank you very much for coming on today and sharing your thoughts on roadmaps and flows. I know I put your Twitter out on the stream, but where can everyone find you?
Yeah, so I'm at nikhilvimal.com. So that's, I don't know if my name popped up on this, but that's one spot to find me. Twitter is where I'm active the most, and then LinkedIn as well. Actually, I've been doing a lot of content writing on LinkedIn lately. I'm going to plug something a little bit quickly, but later today on LinkedIn, I will be sharing, based on this conversation, I will be sharing a sort of a roadmap cheat sheet that I created. That will be it's going to be sort of more of a like informal thing. but it'll sort of guide. It can hopefully guide some early stage PMs and at least having some resources for understanding how to create great roadmaps. And particularly, like I think a lot of it will apply to Trello, but some of it will be to the methodology that I talked about. So yeah, keep an eye out on that. I'm excited to be dropping it. But this conversation definitely or even the fact that we were going to have this conversation like early this morning, I just got up and wrote this huge thing because I admittedly, I feel like I've been talking about things that even I wish I knew when I was an early,
Exactly.
I was a PM for an early stage startup. Yeah. So I'm going to create this very sort of specific, this use case document. And yeah, I hope it's helpful. But anyways, plugs aside, I've really enjoyed being on the Product Angle again. So thanks for the invite. And it's been a pleasure.
No, thank you. I'm going to keep an eye out for that. And before we go, I think I want to plug something too.
Please.
Next week, we will be talking to Jim Semick, co-founder of Product Plan, and we'll be continuing to talk about the same themes of demystifying roadmaps. So it's next Friday, August 14th at 12 noon Eastern, and head over to meetup.com/the Product Angle, and you'll be able to sign up right there.
I'm excited to tune into that one. I'm like, all of them have been good so far, but yeah, I'm looking forward to keeping an eye on more of these. Like, I want to hear different perspectives too. It's always the key. It's always the key.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Nico.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Bye.